Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel. First and foremost, let me just get a little announcement out of the way. This is a regular On the Stone video. This isn't a Rolling Stone, but you are going to notice something very, very quickly, and that is that this On the Stone video is going to be shot very much like it is a Rolling Stone video. Very few cuts, etc., etc., etc. And the reason for that is because I really wanted to get this video out there because we are talking about the presidential election, and as you all know, everything could change literally like that, and also because a rather unusual On the Stone video is very apropos for a presidential election that is very unusual in and of itself. Although, let me actually rephrase that. It is not unusual, it is fascinating in a disgusting, nauseating way. Because what we are seeing, gang, let me just put it very bluntly, and now I'm not saying anything new here in saying this, okay? That's going to come a little bit later. But we are seeing a presidential election being stolen right from under our very noses, right in front of our eyes. We are seeing a presidential election be stolen. Let me just give you a few examples of what I mean by that, okay? So, for example, on election night in Wisconsin, Trump had a 4.1% lead over Biden, okay? And then the state, around 11:30 Central Time, just announced, we're not going to count the ballots anymore, okay? We are stopping ballot counting until tomorrow morning. Now, that in and of itself was suspicious because for the last year, at least, we have been inundated from people like Nancy Pelosi, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, etc., 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 that this was the most important presidential election, probably not just of our lifetimes, but of our entire history. Because American democracy itself was on the ballot. American democracy itself was at stake, because if Trump won, we were going to enter into a fascist new world order, which was some sort of cross between 1938 Germany and The Handmaid's Tale. That was the message. So, if that was true, why would you stop counting the ballots at 11 o'clock at night? On election night, FYI. But they stopped counting, and then when everyone had gone home, when everyone had gone to bed, there was a vote dump. All of a sudden, just a whole horde of new votes were discovered. And surprise, 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 100% of those ballots went to Biden. Okay, not 50%, not 75%, not 80%, 100% of those votes, quote unquote, discovered in that vote dump went to Biden. And it wasn't just in Wisconsin, okay? Although I should also note that in Wisconsin, they found out that there were more ballots cast in Wisconsin than there were actual registered voters in Wisconsin, okay? So that should get the old spider sense tingling as well. In Michigan, the same thing happened. Trump had a slight lead over Biden, a couple of percentage points. About 11 o'clock on election night, they stopped counting, and then in the dead of night, there was a vote dump. In Michigan's case, 138,339 votes were discovered, and they all went to Biden. 100% of those votes went to Biden. In Georgia, okay, to leave the northern part of the country and head on down south, in Georgia, Republican observers, okay, who were stationed at the polling stations, because a lot of states have laws that say observers from both parties can watch the ballots be counted, because like my dad would say, it's keeping honest people honest, which I love that. I love that saying. But anyway, Republican observers in Georgia, they were told to go home because, okay, the ballots, we're going to stop counting ballots for the night. I'm like, okay, they went home, And then they kept counting the ballots after the Republican observers left. This happened in Fulton County, Georgia, by the way. So if you live in Fulton County, Georgia, and even if you don't like Trump, you hate Trump, think the worst of Trump, and even if you voted for Joe Biden, if you are, just even have a shred of American decency and patriotism in you, demand that be rectified. Get after those local officials, because at this point, okay, it's beyond Trump. This is about the system itself. And we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. To give just a few more examples, the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court, which is the lower court in the state of Pennsylvania, the lower state court, it actually said, it ruled from the bench that the Trump campaign could be present while ballots were counted. They could be present while the ballots were counted. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the same geniuses who said that, mail-in ballots could be counted even if they arrived 3 days late without a legible postmark, those could be counted no problem. Those same geniuses reversed the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court's decision and said, nope, the Trump campaign, you don't have a right to actually be present while those ballots are being counted. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And now the same thing is happening. In Michigan, this is from MSN, okay? With Michigan ballots counted, judge dismisses Trump campaign's lawsuit. A judge has denied the Trump campaign's lawsuit seeking to stop vote counting in Michigan until the campaign's representatives could get what it called meaningful access to observe the process. Ruling from the bench, the judge said the ballot counting is already finished. So there you have it, because the Trump campaign's strategy at this point was to release a barrage of legal lawsuits in different states, in Arizona, I believe in Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, because of all the quote-unquote irregularities that people were discovered or which have been leaked out into the media from independent sources, such as James O'Keefe's Veritas Project, or just regular citizens. Just regular citizens. Someone in Wisconsin, I believe it was in Wisconsin, yes, was actually just plugging in the names and birth dates of people who have died in Wisconsin. I mean, died a while back. I mean, he was putting in people who had been born in 1901, etc. And apparently, according to state records, these people had actually voted in the 2020 election. They were 128 years old, but by God, they took Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren and AOC and company seriously, and they came back from whatever coma they were in, from whatever cocoon they had spun for themselves, waiting for rejuvenation a la Doctor Who, or they literally crawled out of their graves to vote to save American democracy. I mean, I literally think that, I know that the Purple Heart is specifically a military medal that can only be awarded to soldiers who have been wounded on the battlefield in the heat of battle. But I don't know, guys. I seriously think that Congress needs to stamp some sort of new medal so that all the people who were dead or who were on death's door but who magically received the energy and the life force to vote on Election Day 2020, they need to have a special medal all to themselves, because, they might have saved American democracy. But all joking aside, this is what is happening. Okay, we are seeing an election being stolen right before our eyes. And the media, of course, shock of all shocks, was right in along with it. To give just a few examples, on election night itself, Virginia, all of the pundits and all of the watchers in the media, they called the state of Virginia for Biden when only 10% of the vote had been counted. And when Trump actually was ahead of Biden with the ballots that had been counted. Of the 10%, okay, of the ballots that had been counted in Virginia, 10% of the total, Trump had 58% of those ballots and Biden only had 40%. Now, of course, that could have changed very easily and very quickly. But when only 10% of the vote has been counted and when one candidate is 18 percentage points ahead of his opponent in those counted ballots, how in the world can you call that particular state, in this case again Virginia, how can you call it for the guy who is 18 points behind in the counted ballots? It don't work like that, unless of course you're cheating. Unless of course you are playing a game of election fraud. There is absolutely no other way to put this game. No way whatsoever to put this. And social media was in on it as well. Color me shocked, but it was. For example, Twitter was muting and even suspending people for reporting the irregularities in the election. Username Derek Duck was monitoring these irregularities, and his account was suspended. Matt Makowicz, I know I'm mispronouncing that last name. I'm terrible with names, my apologies. But Matt Makowicz, okay, he was showing the irregularities of the election, such as what we just mentioned a few minutes ago, these vote dumps in Wisconsin and Michigan going 100% for Biden. And Twitter actually censored his tweets where he was discussing that, showing the graphs and everything. And then people who retweeted him were being censored. Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire retweeted Makowicz, and he was saying, okay, this has to go to the court because the left is obviously trying to cheat. There is no way of getting around that fact. And then Twitter censored Matt Walsh. And then when Trump retweeted Matt Walsh's tweet, where Matt Walsh had retweeted Makowicz's tweet, Twitter censored Trump's account. And if we can just pause there for just 1 second, I think that going forward into the future, this is actually going to be how social media continues to put a lid on stories and narratives and facts and opinions that they despise. They tried censoring the New York Post, which is, an accredited and respected newspaper. Again, it is the oldest newspaper in the United States that is still publishing. It was founded by Alexander Hamilton. That will tell you how old it is and how long it has been continuously publishing news. They tried that when the New York Post broke the Hunter Biden story about with his laptop that had been sent to computer repairman shops in Delaware in 2019, and it had emails and apparently child porn and everything else on it, and emails that directly showed how far in bed with the Chinese government the Biden family is. You remember that story? I think we talked about that, at least very briefly here on the channel. Twitter tried to censor that. Now Twitter had to back off. They had to let the New York Post back into its Twitter account. They originally said that they would let the Post back in if it deleted those particular tweets where they were talking about the Hunter Biden story. The Post refused, and Twitter backed down and gave the Post access back to its Twitter account. But this now is what is going to happen going forward. They learned their lesson. Social media of the left, it's like a hydra, okay? You cut off one head and another one takes its place, which adapts and evolves. I don't think that Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they're not going to try to go after accredited newspapers and news sources. They are going to go after the people like Derek Duck, like Matt Makowicz, James O'Keefe and Project Veritas. They are going to go after independent people who are just doing a patriotic American's job and reporting election fraud, reporting corruption. And these people are going to be censored, they are going to be suspended, they are going to be locked down because they violate Twitter's rules. That is what is going to happen going forward. And the left, the left is just, I mean, it's like a steam train, and they are going, no, I'll give you a better example. What is the Clark Gable movie where he is the submarine commander? I believe it is Run Silent, Run Deep. And at one point, Clark Gable's character says, "Damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead." And that is what the left has been doing. Damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead. Full steam ahead. So the New York Times, yesterday and today, has just been almost a gold mine with what they are running to not even specifically sway the election towards Biden, but to simply poison everybody's minds regarding Trump and everything that Trump represents, including his supporters. So, for example, Jamie Borelli, opinion writer at the New York Times, says Trump isn't an aberration. The left has been saying for years now that Trump is an aberration. Trump is an aberration. Jamie Borelli is saying Trump isn't an aberration. His graft, his corruption, his racism, etc., 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 are all part of American history. They are all part of American history. This actually dovetails very nicely with a story that was published, I believe, today by Time Magazine, which said that even if Joe Biden wins, he will be governing Donald Trump's America, an America that is filled with white supremacy, white patriarchal systems, racism, oppression, etc., etc., etc. They are weaving a narrative that even if their man wins, it won't have been a big enough victory because there is still so much that in their minds has to be done to clamp down, and not even clamp down, to eradicate the quote-unquote neo-Nazis, authoritarian, fascist, white supremacists in our midst. To give another example from the New York Times, all the lies that are fit to print, Michelle Goldberg said that Trump, seriously, she said this, Trump destroyed American culture by making everything about him. She was saying, she cited the fact, for example, that nonfiction books in the past couple of years have been more popular than fictional books. And that a lot of the nonfiction books that were popular have been all about Trump. One guy, she said, even wrote a book about all of the books that had been written about Trump. Sort of a historiographical overview of the books about the Trump presidency. Which is bizarre. She's basically saying that Trump is a black hole that has sucked all the artistic aspiration and imagination from America. She literally said Trump has destroyed the American imagination, because think about all the great art that could have been created if we hadn't been thinking about Trump. And she specifically says, gang, it's not people's fault that they were constantly thinking about Trump. It's Trump's fault. So there you have it. Trump is responsible for the killing of the American imagination. Although I hasten to add that even before Trump, if you think that there was some golden age or renaissance of American art, an American age of letters and literature, you're fooling yourself, because there wasn't any such thing. Okay, what was being produced for the vast majority in film, television, books, traditional art, as in paintings and sculpture, etc., was garbage. It was trash. It didn't even deserve the name of art. Should throw architecture too. It's also kind of funny that the Trump and the Trump administration, which said that federal buildings should be beautiful again, and therefore new federal buildings should be built in the classical or neoclassical style, like many of those buildings were. You think of the Washington Memorial, you think of the Capitol building, Supreme Court building, the White House, etc., etc., etc. Trump and his administration were attacked for attacking, quote-unquote, artistic freedom. So, no, he did not destroy culture. The left destroyed culture, but again, it is a rewriting of history. And of course, David Brooks, again, opinion writer at the New York Times, they were having a field day, I tell you what, said that Trump has destroyed decency. Not, like we haven't heard that 5 gazillion times since 2016, since this time 4 years ago. And we still don't know. The hell of it is, gang, we still do not know who won the blasted election. In fact, North Carolina, I saw yesterday from NBC News, a tweet from NBC News, reporting that North Carolina has announced that it won't have a final tally of the vote until November 12th. I am recording this video on November 5th, Guy Fawkes Day. That is a week from now. North Carolina is saying a part of the United States of America, the premier Western power still in the world, and it's saying that it cannot have a final ballot tally until 9 days after a presidential election? Are you serious? And of course they are, because it's not about the election anymore. It is about getting their boy Joe into the White House by whatever means necessary. They will drag him by his oxygen support if they have to. They will drag him in. It will come to that. It actually might here. So that is the situation as we sit here. That is the situation on the ground. So what are the lessons here? What are the lessons? I think that there are several, gang. In the first place, it's the institutions that matter and not the person. Joe Biden hardly campaigned at all. Once he sewed up the nomination way back when was Super Tuesday, February, I think. Yeah, I think Super Tuesday was in February. Ever since he clinched the nomination in February, Joe Biden has been like the groundhog, coincidentally, also in Pennsylvania. Meaning that he has popped up from his basement every once in a while, done some Zoom stuff, done some video interviews. He's done a few events. But other than that, he has not been on the actual campaign trail. And he didn't have to be. He didn't have to be. Last week, it was announced that the Biden campaign was going to, quote-unquote, put a lid on all campaign events, i.e. they weren't going to do anything until Election Day itself. And I made this point on Twitter that Biden could get away with it because the left owns all the institutions that matter. The left owns academia. The left owns the education system. The left owns the media. The left owns Hollywood. The left owns the entertainment industrial complex. Whether Joe Biden was campaigning or not, whether Joe Biden was on the campaign trail or not, didn't matter. Because all the institutions that matter, all the institutions that have the social, the cultural power, the prestige, the financial power, etc., 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 are going to be campaigning for good old Joe. That's the first thing, okay? It doesn't matter. Institutions matter, not the actual person. The institutions, they are the dam. And the institutions will not allow anyone to escape their grasp unless they have the anointing, the benediction from the institutions, i.e. from the left itself. And that leads to the second point, the second lesson. We're living under an oligarchy disguised as democracy. The left is saying that everything that they are doing is for the preservation, for the defense of American democracy. But as we have just pointed out, that is cock and bull. That is cock and bull. Okay, this is not democracy. This is an oligarchy. In fact, gang, it's even worse than that. Because democracy now means, because it has been redefined by the left, democracy means now voting exactly how the left wants you to vote. Nikole Hannah-Jones, whom we have mentioned numerous times before here on the channel, the brains behind the 1619 Project, And hat tip, thank you to Dr. James Lindsay for tweeting this out because, FYI, Nikole Hannah-Jones blocked me on Twitter, so I can't see when she tweets anything. Nikole Hannah-Jones actually said that Cubans, Hispanic voters, okay, Cubans, who voted for Trump are not really Cubans, okay? Latino is simply a category created by white people, and that Cubans, when they vote for Trump, are trying to appease basically their white masters so that they can join the white club. And she asked rhetorically, and many people on the left immediately ran with this idea, saying, well, do white Cubans, do they really understand the suffering that other, lower class Hispanics from Nicaragua and Guatemala and Venezuela, et cetera, do they understand the suffering, the prejudice, the oppression that these people go through, these white Cubans who, I don't know, just escaped a communist dictatorship? They or their families escaped first the Batista regime in Cuba or the communist Castro regime. But do these people, because they're white, do they understand anything about struggle and oppression? That is literally now that is literally happening right now in front of our eyes. Democracy now means voting how the left wants you to vote. And if you don't vote like that, then you're not for democracy. You are not for democracy at all. Not at all. In fact, there was another piece in Time magazine, written by a professor from Rutgers University, which actually said that if Trump wins re-election, it will be the fault of white people. Now, you have that just out there. That's the headline. That's the obvious, oh, okay, white people bad. But think about it on another level, gang. Everyone who is black, everyone who is Hispanic, everyone who is, gay, whatever, if you belong to a minority that has been graphed and calculated by the left in their intersectional and critical theories, if you vote opposite that the left tells you to vote, opposite to critical theory, opposite to intersectionality, then you are no different than a white person. You are no different than an oppressor. In fact, you're not really black, you're not really Hispanic, you're not really whatever. You are simply a white person. You are, probably more likely than not, a white, hetero, cisgendered white male. That's probably what you are underneath. Doesn't matter if you if you came from Nigeria and became an American citizen and liked Trump better than Biden. Doesn't matter. You are a white man. You are an oppressor. So that is happening. We live under an oligarchy disguised as a democracy. Another lesson from that is that the corruption is deep in the United States. Because if you want to know the truth, gang, what is even worse than the blatant election corruption that we're witnessing is the fact that the left is so brazen about it this time. They're not trying to hide it. It's not cloak and dagger stuff. This is happening right out in the open. For example, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court saying, nope, the Trump campaign, you don't have a right to see the ballots while they're being recounted, even though there have been multiple irregularities reported in Pennsylvania. They are exceedingly brazen about it. That's even worse because it shows that they believe that they can get away with it. Probably shows that they can get away with it. Again, going back to the fact that they own all the institutions that matter. And what's even worse than that is that roughly half of the American population either doesn't care that this brazen corruption and election stealing is happening, or they are actually applauding it. That is terrifying. So that's another lesson. And the fourth lesson from all of this, and I know I mean very, very long-winded, gang, I apologize. There is no return to normalcy. There is nothing. Joe's mantra, return to normalcy, It's a lie. There is no return from normalcy. How do I know this? Because to paraphrase something that David Berlinski wrote many, many years ago, once something happens in history, it is very hard to put it back because it always is there as an example that people can reference. That's why the 20th century was so terrible. It's because they had all of these examples, the carnage of the First World War, the rise of the Reich and the Holocaust, the rise of the Soviet Union and the spread of communism. I mean, all of these things, and that's why the 21st century is still probably going to be worse than the 19th century, the 17th century, the 19th century, 18th century, 17th century, etc., etc., etc. Because as bad and as bloodthirsty and as terrible as those times were, because people are people, they didn't have those examples to fall back on. They didn't have those examples to gain inspiration from, evil inspiration. Now those things, they have happened, they are in history, they can't be put back into the bottle. And so to turn to the American election this year, when you have businesses boarding up their stores out of fear of quote-unquote post-election civil unrest, and when the National Guard in 16 states are activated for that very same reason, you don't have a society. You have a conglomeration of carbon-based life forms that are held together only with the equivalent of Scotch tape and bubble gum. And that's it. That is it. Every election now is going to be like this. Every election is going to have the threat of violence. Every election, it is going to be the oligarchy which tries desperately to put their boy in office because they control all the institutions. And now because the oligarchy very swiftly is coming under the thumb of the mob, as we saw this summer, it's the mob that is going to be running everything. We are going to be living under a mobocracy. We are living, in fact, we have entered that period, I would say, already. To quote myself again on something that I said on Twitter, whether he loses this election legitimately or whether he steals this election illegitimately, Joe Biden is going to be the last of the quote-unquote mainstream Democratic presidential nominees. Going forward, they are all either going to parrot the mob verbatim or they are going to be culled from the mob itself. So, where does that leave us? Where does that leave us? You're probably shrieking at your screen by now thinking, okay, Nate, you've given us 30 minutes now of doom and gloom. What's the solution, smart guy? What is your solution? Well, gang, I have refrained from saying this before, but I think the time has come for me just to kind of put this out on Main Street. I do not think that there is anything that we can do outside of an actual, honest-to-God revolution. I'm talking American Revolution stuff. I'm not talking about, we're going to have like a revolution and we're going to resurrect the GOP, etc., etc., etc. No. When the left, which is an enemy of mankind, let me just say that. The left is an enemy of mankind. When your enemy is the truth, and when you wage war on the truth in all of its aspects, you are an enemy of mankind. So when an enemy of mankind controls, again, all the institutions and systems and organisms in your country, in your society, in your culture, it is almost impossible to reform it. It's not completely impossible, okay? You can do it. You can do it. It just takes an exceedingly long time. The seeds of what we are experiencing right now, they were planted 100, 110 years ago, at the turn of the 20th century, with the progressive movement. It all has kind of more from that. I mean, this is not a direct result of the American progressive movement, because a lot of other things happened before then. The two world wars, communism, postmodernism that was imported over here from French thinkers like Sartre and Diderot, and of course, our boy Foucault and everything. So it's not a direct line. It has mutated, it has evolved, adapted, changed, whatever you want to call it. But be that as it may, a lot, kind of sort of like the American roots of what we are dealing with now stretch back 100 plus years. So to reform the system, you would have to do the same thing. The right would have to accept that it has lost. The right, conservatism, has lost. Okay? Maybe it hasn't lost, the hearts of a slim majority of the people, even though that in and of itself is debatable. But it has lost politics and the culture. Therefore, the right would have to accept that and say, okay, we are changing strategies. You're still going to run candidates. You're still going to fight like hell in the public square and in politics. But you would have to start doing the cloak and dagger stuff that the progressive movement started way back when, at the turn of the 20th century. Start infiltrating these institutions and systems and organisms, and pretty much be spies behind enemy lines. Or as the late, unfortunately now, the late, great Sir Sean Connery said to Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, pilgrims in an unholy land. Sort of secret pilgrims in an unholy land. That's what the right would have to do in order to reform the system. And you have to understand, with taking that path, that you are in for the long haul. You are probably going to work your entire life and not see the fruit of your labor, because you have to get the ground ready and till the field, as it were, before you can even start planting the seeds, to use a farming analogy. So that is a possibility, but it's going to take a hell of a long time, and there's no guarantee that it would work. Well, of course, but then there's no guarantee that anything will ever work. The only immediate solution, I will repeat, is a revolution. An actual, honest-to-God, second American Revolution. Now, that's something that the right is not saying right now. I think that the right is, in many cases, the modern American conservative movement, the modern, postmodern American right, I think is bewildered, and I think it doesn't quite know what to do. And I think that a part of it is that it does not want to admit that it lost. Because if it admits that it lost, then it means that you have to change your mindset, you have to change your mentality, which then means that you actually have to change your strategy. And people, we're creatures of habit. We just are. And so once you get locked into this set of thinking, then, it's very hard to break out of that. Very hard to break out of that. That's why facts very seldomly convince people, because facts by themselves cannot break into those systems of thought that we develop on our own. So that's what I think. We have to have an American Revolution. Now, some people are going to be queasy about that. Because they're going to say, "Nate, we can't do that. That's treason. We would be fighting against our own heritage and our own Constitution." No, we wouldn't be. To quote Dr. Bradley Birzer, who is a professor of history at Hillsdale College, every revolution steps outside of the law, even if the purpose of that revolution is to restore order, justice, and human flourishing. Like the American Revolution. The American revolutionaries they were technically traitors because they were rebelling against the mother country. They were rebelling against England. In the eyes of the law, British law, which had jurisdiction in America in those days, they were traitors. But they understood, like Thomas Aquinas had pointed out in his commentary on Aristotle's Politics, that if a ruler becomes unjust, then he is not a legitimate ruler, and you do have the right to rebel against him, which is, of course, what happened physically with fighting in 1775, and then officially in that glorious year of 1776. So we would not be fighting against the Constitution. We would be fighting to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution from its domestic enemies. Now, I have been talking for 40 minutes. And I do not want this video to be so long that people look at it and just say, okay, I'm not going to watch that. That is too long. I will be going more into depth into this idea about revolution, the philosophy of revolution, why it is needed now in future videos, gang. Okay, I'm not just going to leave it there, but I wanted to get that idea out. And if you are queasy about that, if you are worried about that, for any reason, then let me leave it to you at that. Let me take it a step back, pedal it a step back, and just say this. Even if you aren't convinced that we need a revolution, then the last couple of days should have proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that we need to break out of the mental boxes that we have put ourselves in, because the strategies that the American right has been utilizing, they're not working. We need to use a historical analogy, we need to cut the Gordian knot. Okay? We have to pretty much break the rules and think in new ways. That is the only way that we are actually going to have a chance to improve not only our country, but our society, our culture, and the flourishing not only of ourselves, but of our kids, if we're lucky enough to have them and have families. So, I have been talking for a long time. I look at my timer and it's 42 minutes. So, I am leaving it there, gang. Again, do not worry. Future videos, we are going to be exploring the idea and philosophy of revolution. I am not just going to leave it up there, and really think about what I said, that the need to break out of our mode of thinking. I'm going to leave it at that, and I will talk to you all really soon. Stay safe and stay free. Ciao, gang.